"Sir, that old woman lives in my house," said the woman to the mob boss, searching for his missing mother. Then, when he follows her, he discovers something shocking. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and let me know what city you're watching from. I'd love to know if you enjoyed my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain fell hard over Chicago on that grey Tuesday, turning the streets into dark mirrors that reflected the misery and abandonment of those with nowhere to go. Emily Hayes walked hurriedly along the uneven sidewalk of the South Side, protecting herself as best she could with a plastic bag over her head, when she spotted the hunched figure leaning against a post near the train station. It was an elderly lady, wearing clothes that had once been expensive, but now hung soaked on her thin body, her grey hair stuck to her face, her eyes lost somewhere distant that only she could see. Emily didn't have to think twice. She approached carefully, using the sweet voice she reserved for the most vulnerable, asking if the lady was all right, if she needed help, if she had a place to go. The woman looked at her with an expression that mixed confusion and relief, as if she had been waiting for someone for so long she no longer knew for whom. When Emily asked her name, she hesitated for long seconds before whispering in a weak voice, "Eleanor. My name is Eleanor." Nothing more. No last name, no address, no memory of how she had ended up there. Emily recognized the signs immediately, having seen it before in other elderly people she had cared for, that fog that descends upon the mind and erases entire pieces of a life. Without documents, with no one looking for her there on the city's outskirts, the lady could easily become just another statistic, another nameless body. But not while Emily Hayes was breathing. With infinite patience, she helped Mrs. Eleanor walk to her modest home, a narrow townhouse she shared with two other ladies she also cared for. The journey was slow, interrupted several times for the old woman to rest, leaning on Emily's firm arms. The rain continued to fall, but now a tattered umbrella protected them both. Found in a convenience store where Emily spent the last few dollars she had in her pocket. During the walk, she tried to talk to Mrs. Eleanor, asking gentle questions about anything that might spark a memory. But the lady just murmured disconnected answers, fragments of sentences that led nowhere. When they finally arrived at the house, the other two ladies Emily cared for, Mrs. Celia and Mrs. Rose, welcomed the newcomer with the natural hospitality of those who know the meaning of needing help. They prepared a basin of warm water while Emily guided Mrs. Eleanor to the makeshift bathroom on the ground floor. She gave her a warm bath with gentleness, noticing the marks on the fragile body, some old scars, others recent wounds from life on the streets. She dressed her in clean clothes that belonged to one of the other ladies, a set of cotton blouse and pants that was too big, but was comfortable and smelled fresh. In the cramped kitchen, Emily prepared homemade chicken noodle soup, the same kind her mother used to make when she was a child. She served the still steaming food in a cracked ceramic bowl and watched with satisfaction as Mrs. Eleanor began to eat, first slowly, then with more appetite, as if her body finally recognized it was safe. Gradually, in the weeks that followed, Mrs. Eleanor regained some of her physical strength, but her memory remained fragmented, offering only sparse flashes of a life that seemed to have been lived between extremes that did not touch. Sometimes she mentioned fine fabrics and elegant parties. Other times she spoke of a garden with white roses she needed to tend. There were moments when she hummed songs in Italian, with a surprisingly sweet voice that made the other ladies stop to listen. And then there were days when she sat silently in the living room chair, looking out at the street through the window as if waiting for someone who never arrived. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious penthouse in Lincoln Park, Damien Vance contemplated for the 20th time that day the framed photograph of his mother. Eleanor Vance smiled in the picture, that smile that even after years of hard work never lost its sweetness. 6 months. It had been 6 months since she had disappeared, leaving only that enigmatic note about finding peace, about him not looking for her, as if it were possible not to look, as if he could simply accept that the only person who had ever believed in him had vanished without a trace. Damien was a man accustomed to solving problems. For 25 years he had built an empire, first on the bloody streets of the periphery, then expanding to ever larger territories, always maintaining the appearance of a respectable businessman through legal businesses that served as a front for his true operations. He controlled drug trafficking on the south side with an iron fist, commanded an army of loyal men, and had connections that reached the highest levels of power. But none of that mattered when it came to finding his mother. He stood up heavily, walking to the panoramic window that offered a spectacular view of the city. Down below, Chicago teemed with its millions of inhabitants, each one a story, each one a potential mystery. His mother was somewhere out there, lost in that ocean of humanity, and he couldn't find her. The frustration consumed him, but it was the guilt that truly tore him apart inside. Posters with Eleanor's face covered the entire city. The reward offered was so high that it provoked a flood of false information, desperate people inventing stories in the hope of getting the money. His men scoured every hospital, every shelter, every dark corner of Chicago. He bribed police officers, threatened informants, mobilized resources that would be the envy of any official search operation. And nothing, absolutely nothing. His phone rang, and he answered with the automatic expectation that accompanied every call in recent months. It was Richard, his right-hand man, reporting another dead end. A woman had called saying she had seen Eleanor in a shelter in Gary, but when they went to check, it was just another elderly woman of similar appearance. Damien thanked him with a tired voice and hung up, sinking heavily back into the Italian leather armchair. The guilt consumed him slowly. All those nights when Eleanor begged him to get out of that life, all the tears she shed each time the police knocked on the door, every disappointment accumulated over the years when he chose power over the promise of being different. Damien knew he had broken his mother's heart repeatedly, that she carried the shame and fear of having a criminal son. But he never imagined that it would lead her to simply disappear from his life. 3 months after that rainy encounter, Emily already loved Mrs. Eleanor as if she were her own grandmother. The old woman helped with household chores within her limitations, folding clothes with meticulous care, organizing the kitchen cabinets according to a logic that only she understood. But that worked surprisingly well. She told fragmented stories of a past that seemed invented for how luxurious it was, speaking of ball gowns and formal dinners with such longing in her voice that it made Emily's heart ache. And there was that maternal way Mrs. Eleanor had, that instinctive care that survived even when her memory failed. She noticed when Emily was too tired and insisted that the young woman rest while she finished some simple task. She would stroke Emily's hair when they sat together on the porch, a gesture so affectionate and natural that it brought tears to the caregiver's eyes. That attention warmed Emily's heart in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her own mother's death when she was 15 had left a void she thought she would never fill. But Mrs. Eleanor brought back that feeling of having someone who genuinely cared for her, not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. On Sunday afternoons, when the work eased a bit, Emily would sit with Mrs. Eleanor in the small backyard, where she cultivated a modest garden of herbs and some flowers. The old woman was fascinated by the plants, touching each leaf with reverence, murmuring names in Italian that Emily didn't understand, but found beautiful. Sometimes Mrs. Eleanor would take the pruning shears and start tending to the plants with surprising skill, as if her hands remembered what to do even when her mind couldn't explain why. It was on a sunny Thursday afternoon that chance decided to intervene. Emily was taking Mrs. Eleanor to a doctor's appointment downtown, walking slowly to match the old woman's uncertain pace. The appointment was at a community clinic that operated on a first-come, first-served basis, which meant they had left home early to secure a spot. The sun was strong, unusual for that time of year, and Emily worried about Mrs. Eleanor, who tired easily. They stopped at a busy corner to rest for a bit in the shade of a newsstand when Emily's gaze was caught by a poster tacked to a pole. The face staring back at her from the paper was unmistakable, even though it was of a woman visibly healthier and better cared for than the Mrs. Eleanor she knew. But they were the same gentle eyes, the same delicate face shape, the same sweet expression she saw every day in her home. Emily's heart hammered violently in her chest. The words on the poster danced before her eyes. Missing. Eleanor Vance, 68 years old, missing for 6 months. There was a phone number in large letters and the promise of a substantial reward. She looked at Mrs. Eleanor, who was observing a toy store window with childlike interest, completely oblivious to the fact that her image was spread all over the city, that someone was desperately looking for her. For long minutes, Emily stood paralyzed, her cell phone trembling slightly in her hand. Contradictory thoughts clashed in her mind. Relief at being able to return the lady to her family, people who clearly had the resources to care for her properly, to pay for the medical treatment she needed, and which Emily could barely afford. But also a selfish fear of losing her, of seeing that maternal presence disappear from her life just as it had arrived, leaving the void once again. She watched Mrs. Eleanor point to a teddy bear in the window, smiling with that sweet smile that lit up her face despite the wrinkles and confusion. She thought of all the mornings when the old woman woke up before her and made coffee, even if she sometimes forgot to add the grounds and served only hot water. She remembered the nights when Mrs. Eleanor had nightmares and she would stay by her side, holding her hand until the fear passed. All those little routines that had woven a bond between them. But it wasn't about her. It had never been. Emily took a deep breath, searching for strength somewhere inside herself, and remembered why she had chosen this life as a caregiver. It wasn't to keep people with her, but to help them find where they truly belonged. With her hands still shaking, she dialed the number. The voice that answered was male, deep, charged with a controlled urgency that barely hid a profound anxiety. "Hello?" The word came out fast, expectant, as if the owner of that voice had answered thousands of calls in recent weeks, and each one carried the possibility of being the one. I have information about Eleanor Vance," Emily said, her voice coming out more hesitant than she intended. The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the man spoke again, there was something different in his voice, a mixture of hope and the fear of hoping. "Where did you see her? When? Is she okay?" "She's with me," Emily said simply. "I've been taking care of her for 3 months. She doesn't remember what happened before." Another silence, this one even more charged. Emily could hear the man's breathing, could feel the intensity of his emotions even through the phone line. When he finally gave her an address in River North and said he would wait for her in an hour, there were no more questions, no details. Just the address and the absolute certainty that she would be there. The tone was not threatening, but it carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone for whom the word no was a rarity. The restaurant was the kind Emily only knew from the outside, with a valet at the door and a discreet facade that hid the luxury within. She almost gave up 3 times before finally entering, looking at her simple clothes and wondering if they would let her pass the door. She had left Mrs. Eleanor waiting in the car with Mrs. Celia, her neighbor, who had agreed to accompany them after Emily nervously explained the situation. The interior was even more intimidating than she had imagined, all decorated in dark tones and expensive wood, with discreet chandeliers that cast a soft, welcoming light on the widely spaced tables, ensuring privacy. Paintings that probably cost more than she earned in a year adorned the walls. Modern abstracts she didn't understand, but which were clearly important. The air smelled of sophisticated food and expensive perfumes, so different from the aroma of spices and soap that permeated her home. A man in an impeccable suit, probably the maître d', approached her with a professional but slightly questioning expression, clearly noticing that she was not the usual type of client. Emily mentioned the name the man on the phone had given, and immediately the employee's expression changed to something between deference and caution. He led her to a private room in the back, his steps silent on the thick carpet. And it was there that she saw him for the first time. Damien Vance was standing by the window, observing the street movement below, his hands in his suit pants pockets. Even from the back, there was something imposing about him, a presence that commanded attention. When he turned to face her, Emily felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He was imposing, not just because of his above-average height or the athletic build that the expensive suit couldn't completely hide, but because of the aura of absolute power that emanated from him. He had dark, penetrating eyes that seemed capable of reading every secret she kept, of stripping away all the defenses a person could erect. A strong jaw was marked by an almost imperceptible scar near his chin, and there was that magnetic presence that made it impossible not to look at him, even when every instinct told you to look away. Emily swallowed hard, reminding herself that she was doing the right thing, that this intimidating man was just a son looking for his mother. In the firmest voice she could muster, she said, "Sir, that old woman lives in my house." Damien's reaction was immediate and intense. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping so close she could feel the expensive, woody and complex cologne he wore. His dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her want to retreat, but she stood firm, lifting her chin slightly. "Where?" was all he said, and it wasn't a question, but a demand. Emily explained how she had found Mrs. Eleanor, choosing her words carefully, describing that rainy day, the state the old woman was in, the subsequent weeks of care. She talked about how she had been looking after her for the past 3 months, about the medical appointments she had managed through the public system, about the moments of clarity and the long periods of confusion. She explained how the old woman's memory remained fragmented, offering only glimpses of a past she couldn't organize into a coherent narrative. As she spoke, she observed the transformation on Damien's face. He had started with a hard, almost threatening expression, but as she described the care she had given his mother, the mask of absolute control began to crack at the edges. It was subtle, visible only in small details. The slight twitch around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, revealing a pain so deep it was almost physical. When she mentioned that Mrs. Eleanor introduced herself only as Eleanor and seemed to remember nothing before that day in the rain, she saw something definitively break in his eyes. It was just a moment, a split second in which all that armor of control fell away, revealing a man devastated by pain and fear of what might have happened to his mother during those lost months. "Take me to her," Damien said, and there was no room for negotiation in his voice, but there was also no threat, just a plea barely disguised as an order. Now. The journey to the south side was made in silence, in the back of a luxurious black Mercedes with a leather interior that Emily was sure was worth more than her house, and probably all the neighboring houses combined. The driver, a large, silent man, drove with professional efficiency. Damien didn't take his eyes off the window, watching the city gradually transform as they moved away from the center. Emily watched his profile, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched repeatedly on his thighs, the only visible sign of nervousness. She saw as the buildings got lower, the streets narrower, poverty becoming more evident in the peeling facades and uneven sidewalks. She wondered what he was thinking, if he was judging her choice to live there, if he understood why she had chosen to care for forgotten people instead of seeking a more comfortable life in a better part of the city. When they finally arrived at Emily's house, a narrow townhouse squeezed between similar constructions, with faded paint and a small porch where clothes were drying in the sun, Damien got out of the car before it had completely stopped. Emily followed him hastily, catching up with him at the front door. Mrs. Eleanor was in the kitchen making coffee, an activity that had become part of her daily routine, something her hands knew how to do even when her mind wandered. She hummed a quiet Italian song, stirring the coffee on the old stove with slow, careful movements. She turned upon hearing the door open, her face lit with that welcoming smile she reserved for when Emily came home, and when her eyes landed on Damien, something passed across her face. It was a spark of recognition, subtle and fleeting, like distant lightning on a stormy night. It passed so quickly that Emily almost thought she had imagined it, but she saw the way Mrs. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly, making the spoon clink against the aluminum pot. Damien stopped in the middle of the small living room, suddenly seeming too large for the space, all those weeks of desperate searching, all that fear and anguish culminating in that moment. "Mother," he said, and the voice that had been firm and controlled now trembled perceptibly, laden with months of repressed pain and hope. Eleanor studied him with her head tilted, like a bird observing something familiar, but not completely recognizable. Her eyes roamed his face, stopping at the scar on his chin, then at the dark eyes that were so much like her own, as if trying to fit this imposing man into some corner of her fragmented memory, rearranging the pieces until they formed a complete picture. "You," she said finally, with that soft voice Emily knew so well. "You look like someone I ought to know." Emily saw the impact of those words on Damien, the way he briefly closed his eyes as if he had taken a physical blow to the chest. His shoulders slumped slightly, all that posture of power and control crumbling before the reality that his mother, the most important person in his life, did not recognize him. When he opened them again, there were unshed tears glistening there, making those dark eyes even more intense, and Emily felt her heart ache with an empathy she hadn't expected to feel for this powerful stranger. In the weeks that followed, Damien became a constant presence in Emily's house. He came every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times, arriving early in the morning and staying late into the night. He brought private doctors to examine Eleanor, neurologists who spoke in technical terms about cognitive degeneration and memory loss. He filled the house with supplies Emily could never afford, organic foods, special vitamins, equipment that made caring for Eleanor easier. He made repeated offers to transfer his mother to the best hospitals in the city, places with large gardens and medical teams available 24 hours a day. But Eleanor refused to leave, becoming agitated whenever the subject was mentioned, grabbing Emily's arm with surprising strength and pleading with her eyes not to be taken away. She was attached to that simple house and the quiet routine she had established, to the familiar smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of the other ladies chatting in the living room, the small backyard where she spent her afternoons. And so Damien stayed, adapting to this world, so different from his own. He would sit in the small kitchen, his long legs barely fitting under the formica table, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs that were so different from the fine china in his penthouse. He talked with the mother, who sometimes recognized him as someone's son, and sometimes treated him as a kind stranger who came to visit, a mysterious benefactor whose presence she appreciated even without fully understanding it. It was during these days that Emily began to know the man behind the intimidating facade. Damien was surprisingly gentle with Eleanor, patient in a way that contradicted everything his appearance suggested. He helped his mother walk around the tiny yard, a strong arm around her fragile waist, adjusting his pace to hers without complaint. He read to her in the afternoon, choosing books of Italian poetry he found in specialized second-hand bookstores, his deep voice pronouncing the words with an accent that revealed roots he usually kept hidden. He listened to her repeated stories without ever complaining, pretending it was the first time he'd heard about the garden of white roses or the blue dress she wore to some distant ball. And on the rare occasions when Eleanor had moments of total lucidity and recognized him as her son, calling him by name with perfect clarity, the pure joy that lit up his face was heartbreaking. He would smile then, a genuine smile that completely transformed his features, making him look years younger, and Emily could glimpse the boy he had been before life hardened his edges. But Emily also saw the other sides of Damien. The urgent phone calls he took on the porch, moving away for privacy, speaking in codes she didn't fully understand but that carried veiled threats. Phrases like, "handle it before it becomes a problem," or "he knows what happens if he doesn't cooperate," said in a cold, distant tone that violently contrasted with the kindness he showed Eleanor. The men who occasionally appeared on the street in dark cars, waiting patiently for orders, their eyes always moving, assessing potential threats. The scars she glimpsed once when he rolled up his sleeves to help her move a piece of furniture, marks that clearly hadn't been caused by common accidents, but by knives and perhaps bullets, stories of violence written permanently on his skin. The attraction between them grew slowly, like a tide rising imperceptibly until it suddenly covers everything. It began with glances that lasted a second longer than they should have, with Emily catching herself watching the way he held his coffee cup or how his eyes softened when he spoke to Eleanor. It continued with hands that touched when passing dishes during dinner, a brush of fingers that sent little electric shocks up both their arms. It evolved into conversations that stretched late into the night after Eleanor was asleep, sitting on the narrow porch under the polluted Chicago sky, sharing stories and comfortable silences. Damien asked her questions about her life, showing genuine interest in her choice to dedicate herself to caring for abandoned elderly people. He wanted to know how she had started, what motivated her to continue when the work was so demanding and the financial reward so small. And she found herself wanting to know more about the boy he had been before he became this complex man, about the dreams he had and the choices that led him down such dark paths. One night, while they were washing dishes together after dinner, Damien began to talk. He started hesitantly, as if not used to sharing those memories, but gradually the words flowed more easily. He told her about growing up in Little Italy, the son of Italian immigrants who came to America seeking a better life but found only hard work and poverty. About seeing his mother work to exhaustion in 3 different jobs after his father died when he was only 12. A sudden heart attack that left them with nothing but debt and despair. He talked about the choices he made, initially just to help support the house, small jobs for local merchants who were more generous than legal. Then, because he discovered he was good at wielding power, at making others fear him, at building structures of loyalty and control. And eventually, because that became who he was, an identity he could no longer separate from even when he wanted to. "She always begged me to get out of this life," he said, his hands still in the soapy water, looking at some distant point through the kitchen window that overlooked the dark yard. "Every time the police knocked on the door, every time someone tried to kill me, I saw her heart breaking a little more. But I kept promising it was temporary, that I'd get out soon, that I was saving enough money to give us a better life. 25 years of empty promises." Emily said nothing, just continued drying the dishes, giving him the space to talk. She had learned over the years that sometimes people just needed someone to listen without judging, without offering easy solutions or cheap absolutions. 6 months before she disappeared, Damien continued, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, she discovered the true extent of what I do. Not just the trafficking, but the people I've hurt, the lives I've destroyed. We had the worst fight of our lives. She said she didn't recognize me anymore, that the son she raised had died somewhere along the way. He finally turned to look at Emily, and she saw the raw pain in his eyes, without filters or defenses. 3 days later, she was gone. The raw sincerity of the confession touched something deep in Emily. She put the dish towel aside and, without thinking much about what she was doing, covered his hand with hers. "You can still change," she said softly. "It's never too late to become the person your mother always believed you could be." Damien looked at her hand on his, small and calloused from work, so different from the manicured hands of the women he usually associated with. And when he looked up, there was something new there, something vulnerable and hopeful that he usually kept well hidden behind layers of cynicism and hardness. "Do you really believe that?" "I believe in redemption," Emily replied. "I believe people can change if they really want to. The question is, do you want to?" Before he could answer, they heard a sound from Eleanor's room, a muffled cry followed by movement. They ran there and found the old woman sitting up in bed, eyes wide, breathing fast. Her hands gripping the sheets as if they were the only solid thing in a world spinning uncontrollably. But this time, there was something different in her gaze, a clarity that wasn't there before, as if a veil had been lifted. "Damien," she said, and the name came out with total recognition, pronounced the way only a mother can say a son's name. "My son." Damien knelt beside the bed, holding his mother's hands with a gentleness that contrasted with his obvious strength. "I'm here, Mother. I'm here." "I remember," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I remember everything. I remember running away because I couldn't live seeing you become a monster. I remember wanting to forget, begging God to erase from my mind everything you had become." "Oh." The words were like knives, and Emily saw Damien flinch with each one. But he didn't pull away. He kept holding his mother's hands, letting her say everything she needed to say. "But I also remember," Eleanor continued, her voice stronger now, "the boy you were. The boy who shared his bread with hungry friends, who protected the smaller children from bullies, who swore he would take care of me forever." She caressed his face with trembling hands. "That boy is still in there. I know he is." "I don't know if he is, Mother," Damien said, his voice broken. "I've done terrible things. I've hurt people. I've become exactly the kind of man you taught me to despise." "Then change," Eleanor said simply. "It's never too late to choose a different path." Emily quietly left the room, giving them privacy for that long-awaited conversation. She sat on the porch, looking at the stars that managed to shine through the city's light pollution, and thought about all the complexities of this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. She knew she should be afraid, that any sensible woman would stay away from someone with his past. But she couldn't deny what she felt, that attraction that went far beyond the physical, that deep connection that seemed to have been woven by the very circumstances that brought them together. When Damien finally emerged from the room an hour later, his eyes red but lighter somehow, as if a weight had been removed from his shoulders, he found Emily still on the porch. He sat beside her without saying anything for long minutes, just existing in the same space, sharing the comfortable silence that develops between people who are starting to truly know each other. "She's back asleep," he said finally. "The doctors warned me that these moments of total lucidity can be temporary, that the Alzheimer's is progressing." His hand found hers in the dark, fingers intertwining naturally. But she recognized me. For the first time in 6 months, my mother looked at me and knew exactly who I am. "And what are you going to do with that?" Emily asked gently. Damien was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with determination. "I'm going to change. I don't know how. I don't know if it's possible to get out of the life I've built without them killing me in the process, but I'm going to try. For her, for you, for myself." Emily felt her heart race at the last words. "For me?" He turned to look at her, and even in the dim light of the porch, she could see the intensity in his eyes. "You make me want to be a better man. From the first day I walked into this house and saw how you care for my mother, how you've turned this simple place into a home full of love, you've shown me there's another way to live, a way I had forgotten was possible." Emily knew she should be cautious, that she should protect her heart, but when Damien slowly leaned towards her, giving her enough time to pull away if she wanted, she didn't move. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he were afraid of scaring her or tainting something pure with his presence. But when she responded, deepening the contact, something changed. Years of loneliness, of dedicating herself only to others, of forgetting her own needs, all of it came to the surface in a whirlwind of emotions. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead on hers. "This is crazy," he murmured. "My life is dangerous. People around me get hurt. I shouldn't be getting you involved in this." "Then don't involve me," Emily said, surprising herself with her own courage. "Change your life first. Prove you can really be different, and then maybe we can see where this leads us." It was both a challenge and a promise, and Damien accepted it with a nod. "I'll need time. Leaving this life isn't as simple as sending a resignation letter. There are people who will try to stop me, who will see my exit as a betrayal or weakness." "How much time?" Emily asked. "I don't know. A few months, maybe more. I need to dismantle everything carefully. Make sure the people who depend on me have other options, that my exit doesn't cause a power war." He held her face in his hands. "But I will do it. I swear I will." The following months were the most challenging of Damien's life. He began by discreetly transferring his operations to trusted lieutenants, men he was sure would not use power solely for destruction. He gradually transformed his front businesses into truly legitimate companies, investing in sectors that actually added value to society. He used his contacts and resources to establish social programs, particularly focused on elderly care, thus honoring the vision of life that Emily represented. But not everything was smooth. Rivals saw his transformation as a sign of weakness and tried to take his territories by force. There were violent confrontations, nights when Damien returned to Emily's house with new injuries that she treated in silence, both knowing that each passing day brought them closer to the future they desired and the danger it represented. The most serious threat came from a rival named Marcus Thorne, a cruel man who had always resented Damien's power. When he discovered the existence of Emily and what she represented to his former adversary, he saw the perfect opportunity to strike where it would really hurt. Marcus's men began to hang around Emily's house, making veiled threats, making it clear that she and Eleanor were targets. Damien wanted to move them immediately to a safe place, surround them with bodyguards, turn that house into a fortress, but Emily refused. "I will not live in fear," she said firmly, "and I will not abandon the other people I care for here just because someone decided to use me to get to you. This is my home, my life. If you want to be a part of it, you need to find another solution." The solution came unexpectedly. Damien sought out Marcus personally. Without security, without weapons, just two men sitting in an empty bar having a frank conversation. He offered Marcus everything, all his territories, all his contacts, the entire infrastructure he had built over decades. In return, he only wanted Emily, Eleanor, and all those under their care to be left in peace. Marcus laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of trap, but when he realized Damien was being sincere, that he was really willing to give up his empire just to protect a woman, he was baffled. "You're crazy," he said. "You're throwing away everything you've built for some random slum girl?" Damien's reaction was instant and violent. In one swift move, he had Marcus pinned against the wall, his forearm against his throat. "She is worth more than any empire," he said in a deadly voice, "worth more than all the power, all the money, all the influence I've ever had. And if you or any of your men lay a finger on her, there will be no place on earth you can hide from me." But then, forcing himself to control his anger, Damien backed away. He had promised Emily he would change, and that included not solving everything through violence. With controlled breathing, he returned to the table and repeated his offer. "Everything I've built is yours, but in return, you guarantee their safety. That's the deal." Marcus, still rubbing his throat, studied Damien for long moments before finally nodding. Both knew that this demonstration of force, followed by the willingness to negotiate, was exactly the kind of balance their world respected. The deal was sealed, and for the first time in months, Damien felt that he might actually manage to get out of that life with everyone still alive. Throughout this period, the relationship between Damien and Emily deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. On the nights he arrived tired and bruised, she cared for him with the same dedication she showed Eleanor. On the mornings Emily woke up exhausted from caring for multiple patients, she would find Damien already in the kitchen, brewing strong coffee just the way she liked it, silently taking on some of the household chores to ease her burden. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering each other's complexities. Damien revealed dreams he had as a young man before the brutal reality of the streets twisted his ambitions. Emily shared her own wounds, the pain of losing her mother so young, the constant fear of not being enough for all the people who depended on her. The sexual tension between them was palpable, growing with every accidental touch, every prolonged gaze. But they both maintained a respectful distance, knowing that crossing that line before Damien was completely free of his past would only further complicate an already delicate situation. It was on a particularly difficult night that this distance finally dissolved. Damien arrived at Emily's house later than usual, and she knew immediately from his face that something terrible had happened. He had been forced to make an impossible choice between protecting one of his loyal men or honoring his deal with Marcus, and the decision he made cost the life of someone he had known since adolescence. Emily found him sitting in the darkness of the porch, and when he saw her, the entire armor he kept around himself shattered. She knelt in front of him, holding his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "It's not your fault," she said firmly. "You're doing the best you can in an impossible situation." "How can you say that?" he asked, his voice broken. "A man died today because of my choices. How many more deaths until I can finally be free of all this?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but I know that every day you're closer to being free. Every hard decision brings you closer to the life you want to build, and I'll be here waiting for as long as it takes." Something in the way she said it, the unwavering faith in her voice, broke Damien's last resistance. He pulled her into his arms, and when their lips met, there was no more hesitation, just raw, pure need. They made love right there on the porch, under the stars, a union that was as much physical as it was spiritual, a promise sealed between two bodies that fit together perfectly, despite all the ways the world said they shouldn't. Later, lying intertwined on the narrow living room sofa, Damien whispered in the dark, "I love you. I know it's too soon. I know the circumstances are insane, but I need you to know. I love you in a way I've never loved anyone before." Emily felt tears stream down her face, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too. I love the man you are underneath all the layers of pain and violence. I love the man who is fighting to emerge. And I will keep loving you as long as you keep fighting to be that person." Eleanor's condition gradually worsened in the following months. The moments of lucidity became rarer, although when they occurred, they were profoundly significant. She began to treat Damien and Emily as a couple, blessing their union in a way that not even the peculiar circumstances could diminish. In her clearer phases, she expressed pride in the changes she saw in Damien, in the efforts he was making to transform himself. It was during one of these rare moments of total clarity that Eleanor revealed the full truth about her disappearance. It had been deliberate, she explained, not just a product of her deteriorating mental condition. She had discovered the true extent of Damien's activities through documents she found accidentally. And the shock, combined with the onset of Alzheimer's, created a kind of psychological escape. "I chose to forget," she said, holding both of their hands as she sat in the bed she now rarely left. "I chose to wander the streets until my mind erased everything because I couldn't live with the pain of knowing what my son had become. But God has his mysterious ways. He took me from a place of luxury and guilt and put me in a place of simplicity and love." She looked at Emily with tenderness. "And he gave you a reason to change," she said to Damien. The words were both forgiveness and a challenge, and Damien took them to heart. He intensified his efforts to complete his transition, even when it meant making enormous financial sacrifices. Businesses that would be worth millions on the black market were sold for a fraction of their value to ensure they were used only for legitimate purposes. Properties were donated to charitable organizations. Bank accounts were emptied to compensate families of people who had been harmed by his operations over the years. Emily watched all of this with a mixture of admiration and concern. She saw Damien transforming before her eyes, but she also saw the cost of that transformation. The nights he couldn't sleep, tormented by past decisions, the emotional scars that emerged as he finally allowed himself to feel the guilt he had suppressed for decades. She became his anchor in these emotional storms, constantly reminding him that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a different future. Together they began to dream of what they would do when Damien was finally free. They would expand Emily's social projects, create a network of care homes for vulnerable seniors, use his business experience to create something meaningful and lasting. The final moment of transition came almost 2 years after that first meeting in the restaurant. Damien signed the last documents that transferred what was left of his illegal operations, officially severing all ties with the criminal world. It was also the day Eleanor had her last moment of complete lucidity. She called them to her room, holding each of their hands with surprising strength, considering her fragility. "My children," she said, because that was how she saw them both now. "I came to America with nothing but dreams. I raised my son on the streets, saw him lose his way, and then I found a second daughter who showed me that family isn't about blood, but about love and care." She turned to Damien. "You have become the man I always believed you could be. Not perfect, because no one is, but good, fundamentally good. And that's all a mother can ask for." Then she looked at Emily. "And you, my dear girl, you gave me more in these last months than years of luxury ever did. You showed me that even a confused, lost old woman can find a home. Take care of him for me. He will need you in the difficult days yet to come." It was the last coherent thing Eleanor said. In the following weeks, she declined rapidly until on a quiet Sunday morning, surrounded by the two people she loved most in the world, she closed her eyes for the last time. Her face was at peace, finally free from confusion and pain. The funeral was small but significant. Damien had cut ties with most of the people from his former world, so those present were mainly the people Emily cared for and members of the community who had known Eleanor in her final months. It was exactly the kind of farewell she would have wanted, simple and full of genuine love. In the months after Eleanor's death, Damien and Emily dedicated themselves to building something in her memory. They used what was left of his fortune, significantly reduced but still considerable, to establish the Eleanor Vance Foundation, dedicated to the care of vulnerable seniors. They transformed properties Damien owned into welcoming homes, hired compassionate professionals, and created programs that combined medical care with human dignity. Emily took on the clinical direction, bringing her experience and passion to create a model of care that soon gained recognition. Damien, for his part, discovered he had a talent for legitimate management, using his negotiation and strategic planning skills to ensure the foundation's financial sustainability. They worked side by side every day, and at night they returned to the house they bought together. A modest but comfortable place that stood between the world Emily came from and the world Damien had walked away from. It was the perfect balance, just like their relationship. 2 years after Eleanor's death, in a simple ceremony in the foundation's backyard, Damien and Emily were married. There was no ostentation, just close friends and the elderly people they cared for, people who had witnessed their journey and approved of their union. When Damien placed the ring on Emily's finger, he had tears in his eyes, and when she spoke her vows, her voice was thick with emotion. "You showed me that people can change," she said, "that no matter how dark the past is, there is always the possibility of redemption. And more importantly, you showed me that true love isn't about perfection, but about choosing every day to be better for the person you love." Damien kissed her then, under the applause of those present, and in that moment, he felt he had finally found his peace. It was not the peace that comes from the absence of struggle, but the peace that comes from knowing you are on the right path, surrounded by the right people, building something that truly matters. Their honeymoon was spent not on some exotic beach, but helping to establish a new branch of the foundation in New Orleans, expanding their reach to other parts of America. It was exactly the kind of celebration they both wanted, merging personal love with a shared purpose. In the years that followed, the Eleanor Vance Foundation grew beyond their most optimistic expectations. They established branches in 10 American cities, caring for thousands of seniors who would otherwise be abandoned. They created training programs for caregivers, advocated for changes in public policy, and became a national reference in humanized geriatric care. But for Damien and Emily, true success was always measured in the small, daily victories. The smile of an elderly person who found family in their programs. The gratitude of a granddaughter who could finally visit her grandfather in a dignified environment. The stories of reconciliation and redemption that echoed their own journey. Damien never completely forgot his past, and there were nights when the nightmares visited him, reminding him of choices he couldn't undo and lives he couldn't bring back. But Emily was always there, anchoring him in the present, reminding him of how much good he was doing now, of how many lives he was transforming for the better. 5 years after they met, while visiting the first home they had established, now thriving and full of life, Damien stopped before a plaque that Emily had had installed. It featured a photo of Eleanor smiling, accompanied by a quote she had said in one of her last lucid conversations: "Family is where you choose to love and be loved." Emily joined him, intertwining their fingers. "She would be proud of you," she said softly. Damien turned to look at his wife, this extraordinary woman who had seen potential in him when no one else did, who had refused to give up even when it would have been easier and safer to do so. "She would be proud of us," he corrected, "because none of this would have been possible without you." And it was true. Damien's transformation had not been a solitary act of willpower, but a journey shared with Emily, built on love, forgiveness, and the unwavering faith that people can change when they have strong enough reasons and proper support. Eleanor had been the initial reason, but Emily had become both the motivation and the partner in this ongoing transformation. As the sun set over Chicago, casting its golden light on the city that had been the stage for so much suffering, but also so much redemption, Damien pulled Emily close. There, in that moment, surrounded by the tangible fruit of their transformation, he finally felt that he had become worthy of the love of two extraordinary women. His mother, who never stopped believing in him, and his wife, who helped him become the man he could have always been. The weight of guilt he had carried for so long had not completely disappeared, probably never would, but it was now balanced by the equal weight of purpose, love, and hope. And in that balance, he finally found something he thought was forever beyond his reach: true peace. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.